Don't I have to do 2 finance committee meetings?
Yes.
May I?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I got it.
Good catch, Jerry.
Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the DASNY Finance Committee meeting for July. I'm sitting on this side of the table, Al, but whatever you did, you arranged for sort of the end of the world to be looking at. So sure, tomorrow will be a beautiful, perfect day, and you'll have your perfect view.
Let's hope so.
Anyway, thank you. First up behind tab 2 are the meeting minutes from the last 2 Finance Committee meetings from May and also June of 2018. Can I please get a motion to approve those meeting minutes?
Mr. Chairman, may I offer?
I can move.
Yes,
May I offer a very minor change in
certainly.
the June 20 meeting minutes?
Certainly.
Under public session, the second line begins, "That committee meeting had been called to briefly review the," I would propose inserting updated Montefiore Medical Center transaction.
Certainly, thank you. We'll adopt that. With that change included in the June meeting minutes, can I then get a motion to approve, again, the May meeting minutes and the June meeting minutes as we just amended?
So moved.
Thank you, Charlie.
Second.
Thank you, Charlie. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None are opposed, so that motion carried. We will be reviewing one resolution today, and that's behind tab 3, which is seeks to amend the financing guidelines for independent institutions. And Portia will be presenting, and I gather with the assistance of our esteemed outside counsel. No? Oh.
Only if needed.
No, I always like to hear. Okay. Ooh, look at that lightning. I just saw a lightning bolt come down and it hit the Freedom Tower.
Freedom Tower. It was clear
We
as
saw
a
it,
bell.
right? Yep.
Yeah, I saw it.
Hit the power. Very nice. Okay.
Well, then I'm glad I'm facing this
Yes,
side.
you're right over your head, actually, Portia. It was like when I said Portia, and this bolt came down and gave you extra energy for this presentation. Thank you.
So behind tab 3 are the financing guidelines for independent institutions. There's a cover memo from Gerard together with the cleaning guidelines and then a set of black line guidelines. The black line is black line against the guidelines that were approved on December 9th, 2015. I would note that for the members on the table, and I believe up in Albany as well, we recirculated the clean and black line guidelines to reflect a few very minor drafting changes. There's nothing substantive in those changes, and the areas that were changed were really sort of formatting changes, and they're highlighted in yellow in 3 areas so that people are aware of what those changes are. I'd like to talk about the changes to the guidelines, and then certainly if need be, I can sort of explain the very minor drafting and formatting changes that are in the most updated version. As the members know, our current financing guidelines address the entire credit spectrum, allowing borrowers to have an avenue to finance with DASNY. Both of you are rated in the investment grade category, and if you are rated below investment grade or non-rated. In the case where if you're below investment grade or non-rated, that avenue is really through private placements. The change, though, that we seek today and that we'll be discussing today really only has to do with the financings that are rated in the investment grade category. The new approach that we're looking to implement is really for those financing for independent institutions that are rated in the investment grade category to really take an approach that's really based on market conditions and practices. Previously, our guidelines were really set up so that they were set out by sector, higher ed, healthcare, other independent institutions. They also address what we would call the multiple borrowers or the structured financings. And for each of those sectors, they had laid out specific requirements for security by rating category. And, over time, we have made changes to those guidelines using that approach. When we sought changes to the guidelines, it was really based on work that we would do together with outside advisors at times to try to get a sense as to the market and what we were seeing in the market and have that inform the changes that we would be making to the financing guidelines. What we're seeking to do here today, again, for the category of financings investment grade only, is to really sort of build on that approach and to build on it really in terms of how it is that the guidelines are set forth. What we are asking for is that we would actually make clear that there's language in here. We're making very, very clear that the loan agreement is the general obligation of the institution, the bonds are limited obligations of the authority, and that the financing documents would contain the appropriate standard document provisions. But then in addition to that, the financing documents may include additional security. And I think there's a type of security that, we're accustomed to seeing and accustomed to discussing in connection with, the financings that we undertake. And that would be a pledge of revenues, financial covenants, mortgage, and debt service reserve fund. But what we're saying is that basically we would include those security provisions really based on market conditions and practices. So rather than employ sort of a prescriptive approach by sector and by rating category, where we specify what we would like to see by sector and by rating category, what we're saying here is that we would like to undertake this really based on market conditions and practices. And what that really means is that we would be getting information from the underwriter and the borrowers as to what they believe we're seeing in the market. And again, it's really not unlike what we currently do in the sense that that was always a process that we undertook when we sought to make changes to the guidelines.
Right.
And then we would make the changes, and then as time elapsed, we would find that the market had changed, and then we would come back and we would seek additional changes. So I think this type of approach allows us to be in a position where we can provide greater certainty to the borrowers that we work with, because we recognize that the market is continually changing, and that they can look at the guidelines, sort of see clearly that we will look at what the current market conditions and practices are, and on that basis bring the financings to the board for your consideration.
Okay.
There are a couple of other things, though, that I would like to highlight, and that is that, recognizing that we would be acting on what we believe at the time to be the security that's necessary based on the information provided to us by the underwriters and the borrowers, that there is the possibility that that package of security could actually change. And so for example, as you'll recall, last month, in connection with the Montefiore transaction, we had indicated that there would be a mortgage if required by investors. That was consistent with our existing guidelines to the extent that they say that a mortgage is generally required. We had, written in our report that a mortgage would be required we would have a mortgage if required by investors, and it was also included in the bond counsel letter that there could be additional security. But at that point in time, we were being told that the underwriter and borrower did not believe that that would be necessary. We actually just heard from them that last week that they believe that a mortgage would be necessary. So we are including that in the financing as it moves forward. And so as reflected in the memo, if something like that were to occur, we would come back to you and let you know for informational purposes that there is additional security.
Got it.
Conversely, however, if the security were lessened, then we would bring this back to you for your consideration.
Got it.
So I think that's
With lesser, you would come back
For an approval.
Right, for
Right.
approval, greater, it's for information purposes.
Right, so I think that that's an
Makes sense.
important,
Yeah, right.
an important point, as you think about this.
So if the security package changes, if it's internal components, it comprises something different, but the value is about the same, it's not been diminished, you would let us know that. If there's more value, you'll let us know. If there's less value, you'll let us know for sure, and we'll have to approve that. And if there's the same value, just different component parts, I don't know how that could ever possibly happen, but
Well, I
It's really
guess.
the quality of the.
Right, I guess I would,
Yes.
I would say with respect to value, there are specific elements of security, the pledge of revenues, mortgage, a debt service reserve fund, financial covenants. We typically disclose those. They're
Yep.
included in our reports, they're included in the bond council letter. So I think you end up in a situation where either there would be more security, and
Right.
discernibly
Right.
so, or less security, discernibly so. I'm not sure that you end up in a situation
in a center,
where,
right, a middle category that doesn't
Exactly,
exist, okay.
exactly.
Or doesn't likely exist.
exactly. So I do think that that's an important sort of safeguard. The other thing that I would note is that, when thinking about, what does it mean to say that something is based on market conditions? I think what we mean and what we have seen in the case of exceptions is folks come to us and they show us examples, and they say, these are examples of transactions that have moved forward with a particular security package. So for example, as you know, we undertook and staff brought to the board on numerous occasions financings without a debt service reserve fund, when at the time our financing guidelines required a debt service reserve fund. So we would bring it to the board, we would note that it was an exception, we would talk about the examples of financings in the market that were accepted by the market
Right.
without a debt service reserve fund. I would expect that that would be a similar
Okay.
kind of situation in terms of how it is that we would be making that determination of what does it mean to be based on market conditions and practices. Having said that, as you'll recall, the way the financing guidelines are currently written, so for example, for higher ed institutions, if you're rated in the A category or better, you're basically moving forward with a general obligation.
Right.
If you are in the triple B category, we have this, we have sort of the array of security that we had prescribed. So in terms of providing those examples, I would expect that we would see those examples in the triple B category, because that's where we had been prescriptive, and we are now saying we will do this based on what's, based on the market conditions and practices. I would not expect that we would be doing that in the other categories that, by virtue of the way the guidelines are currently written, already have the flexibility to go based on their general obligation. So for example, a AAA rated institution that's gone on their general obligation, I wouldn't expect that we would be coming and saying, oh, and by the way, here are examples of other AAA institutions that went on their general obligation. It was really a matter of where our guidelines were prescriptive,
Got it, all right.
and now we're going with the, sort of a more market-based approach. So where that shows up is, I think, in the higher ed space, in the triple B category. It also shows up in the healthcare sector, because throughout the credit spectrum, investment grade, we had our provisions for what we wanted to see as far as security. So just that clarification in terms of sort of what to expect on a going forward basis. So I think with that, I would pause and ask if there are any questions.
Well, I just just before the meeting started, I asked the question, where do we get our financial information? We get it from the borrower, certainly, about the deal, about the proposed transaction. We get it from the banks. Do we get financial information from the rating agencies?
No. There's an independent sort of work effort of seeking the ratings from the rating agencies, but
Yes.
that's something that's really happening is between the borrower and the banker and the rating agencies. We're not involved in that process. We will see the reports after they're
Sure.
done. But, oftentimes those ratings, they can come at various different points as far as timing is concerned. So sometimes they may have come out before we go to the board, sometimes they may have come out after. There's certainly things that we look at, but we're not a participant in that process. But I think we'd like to keep abreast, certainly.
And where a rating declines, but the rating remains in the investment grade category. I don't remember how you all handled that in the past. If you present to us and the
Yep.
board approves, let's say the board approves, it's a dual approval process. Remind me of how you tell us that, assuming that it remains in the investment grade category.
So I think it's pretty similar. If it remains in the investment grade category, such that there would be no difference in terms of the security
Right.
required as set forth in the guidelines, and I think we tell you,
Okay.
to make sure that you're updated and you have the most recent information. If, however, it would change and it would affect the security,
Yeah. Well,
then, right, exactly, we would have to bring it back for
Exactly.
consideration
That's
because
fine.
the nature of the
The
transaction.
underlying
Exactly.
transaction has changed.
That's exactly right.
Okay. I don't have any more questions about this part of the.
I do
others-
have a question.
Sure, Charlie.
And it involves, the term market factors, practices.
Yep.
I would expect that you can have multiple offerings from multiple sources for entities that are similarly rated, that have varying, a range of security provisions depending on a whole lot of different things. So I would define, market factors or practices to encompass that broad array of security provisions that may apply to a similar credit. So I'm not really clear how you. First of all, I'm looking for you for confirmation of that concept, but and assuming it's valid. Now, how do you assess? How would you envision assessing what security provisions should apply from that range and to a given credit?
So I think, as we were discussing earlier, we're looking to see from the underwriter and the borrowers that they can give us examples of financings, for example, as we did previously, that had entered the market without a debt service reserve fund, for example, or, for example, financings, let's say, that would be accessing the market without a mortgage. If I'm understanding you correctly, Charlie, you're saying that there are numerous financings in the market, and there's probably a range of different kind of security associated with those financings, albeit perhaps in the same rating category. I don't think that what we're saying is that we're surveying the entire market and trying to get a sense as to how all of the financings are being treated, and that we're going to go with sort of, that general sense of the entire marketplace. I think what we're saying is we're looking for examples of transactions that the underwriter and the borrower believe are comparable, and that they can show us that they believe that those transactions have indeed accessed the capital markets.
Okay, so you rely upon the underwriters and the borrowers for that information.
Yes.
So And prior to an offering, how do you assess the borrower's perspectives on that?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So, when it's brought, when a financing is brought to the board, and obviously before an offering is made, I'm not sure how you're assessing what the borrowers would, how the borrowers would bring you comparables. So I guess I'm not familiar with that process.
Yeah. Well, I think, the borrowers and the underwriters are really working together.
So if I hear you correctly, the underwriters are gathering their thoughts about what the borrowers would expect.
I think there are ongoing discussions as to the nature of the financings and the various security provisions. If the borrower is interested in moving forward without a debt service reserve fund, for example, or without a mortgage, I think, that's part of an ongoing discussion. We have certainly been part of those discussions when people have come to us to seek an exception. And then, yes, I think you're right. Then I think it's on the underwriter, who is the most familiar with the market, to go back and see and to come back and demonstrate that there are similarly situated institutions who have accessed the market successfully with the security package that's being sought.
That's reasonable, actually. That makes sense to me. The underwriters have their reputations that have to be considered. So, what I heard Charlie's question getting at was, and I'm not suggesting anything untoward here, but the relationship between the borrower and the underwriter is a relationship that is sort of
Absolutely.
Each one is supporting the other's
Yes.
need, for want of a better expression. But there's no opportunity in there, because you guys are looking at this as well, to say, if the underwriter says that these are the market conditions that apply, that should be applied, and or these market conditions make it necessary for us to do X, Y, and Z in this transaction, we're comfortable that we can rely on that, but we also do our own assessment of the reasonableness of that decision. Is that what you're saying? So market conditions sort of means what the underwriter and the borrower and DASNY believe that to be, believe those conditions to be. So that Charlie's question is that there's always a check and balance. The answer to Charlie's question is there's always a check and balance. Is that sort of a fair description of market conditions?
Yes,
Okay.
buyers and sellers.
Okay.
So
All right.
buyers always want the cheapest price,
Right.
right? Sellers always want to sell
The highest
at the
price.
highest price. And so there's an intrinsic tension in that, all right?
Got it,
And
got it.
so the pricing, even if there's an anomaly in the market today, let's suppose a borrower says that we want it badly, and the seller prices it incorrectly,
Got it.
right, cheaper than they would like. What's going to happen is that every borrower, all right, is going to look at every asset coming to the market that way,
Okay.
and it may not meet that price.
Right,
And
okay.
so you get that push and pull. So what is the market? Okay, and it's a commonly held perspective in terms of what you can
Got it.
purchase that at. But it will have a security package, right?
Yeah.
The security package will determine,
Okay.
what you give
Yeah, I
and
got
what you
it.
get.
Yeah. Thank you. Charlie, does that answer your question?
Yes, that additional discussion helped a lot. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. It helped me too. Thank you.
And we're still relying on the rating agencies, though. Really.
Yeah, no, everybody's going to look at ratings, right?
And the
ratings-
information that's provided to the rating agencies, typically provided by professional firms who have their own reputation. I mean, there's some of this is, you're never going to be guaranteed about anything, but
But-
there is the checks and the
Right.
balances in place there. and-
But the buyers of these assets, they do their own analysis.
Sure.
So in many respects, they look at the ratings institutions, but they've done their own ratings. I mean, they have their own credit research.
Okay.
That's why they call them buy side,
Okay.
all right? Because they have an infrastructure that is scaling the market and pricing these credits and saying, this is the price point.
And
that
let's
we
be
want
real,
to
most of them are institutional buyers at this day and age. I mean, the days of,
Individual
your grandma
buyers.
buying
Yeah.
the bond for, it's, okay. They're all big
And I
boys
guess,
and big girls, I'm sorry.
The other thing I would note, following up on Gerard's comment, is the rating agencies are doing sort of a fundamental analysis of the institution's financial strength, as opposed to, the specific elements of the security package per se. But what the investors are doing is, they're looking at it all. They're looking at the financial strength of the institution, but oftentimes it's that feedback that's coming from the investors that says we think we need these additional features.
I got it.
Because we're not going to pay for that, right?
Right.
So
Right.
if we don't
I
pay
would-
for that, then we want more protection.
Sure.
That's important. That's a very important signal that, look, could we make those determinations? Yes, we can, but they're not always consistent with the market, right?
Yeah.
Market knows what it wants, all right? And they'll come back and tell us,
It's fascinating. It really is.
Because we had this discussion in the context of when we talked about the debt service reserve fund.
Yes,
Yes.
a long time
back,
ago.
right? Because
Was
at
that
the
3 or
end-
4 years ago? We had
Right.
a long, similar type,
Exactly.
as we
exactly.
try our best to stay ahead of the,
Yep. Right. Because at the end of the day, the presence of a debt service reserve fund really speaks to liquidity. It doesn't really speak to the financial strength of the institution.
Right.
It's liquidity, it buys you time.
And
So-
where where the liquidity is necessary, liquidity is borderline, what you can do by insisting on a debt service reserve fund is to actually push that credit in a bad direction by simply forcing them to set that aside.
Then there's more borrowing, right?
Yes, oh, that's right.
Right.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. This is all obvious to you all.
no, I mean, look,
Catching
I think the good thing is if there is a period of instability or turmoil, we could make judgments and say that, we want pledge of revenues, we want debt service, but the market could say, I want more than that.
Yes.
And the market is likely to say, I want a lot more than that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very important catalyst.
Interesting.
and we are a conduit issuer at the end of the day.
Yeah. There you go.
That is correct.
That's really, at the end of the day, really
With the disclosures.
Well, the disclosures, you want to just insist that the conspicuous, that, on the private play, we just have some level, I think, of obligation to just, but you have done that, I think. The disclosures.
Yeah, of course.
And one other thing that I would note, is not specific to the guidelines, but I think it's somewhat related. Later in the board book, under the tab that has my information, there's a draft of a staff report that shows the kinds of modifications that we are seeking to make, and they're really, I think, very, very, very modest in nature. So, to the extent that the approach is changing somewhat here in terms of the guidelines, the information that's being presented as far as the reports is really the same as what you are currently
Can
getting.
you trace this? I'm putting on a different hat, sort of the business hat. Can you trace this over time, a period of a year or 2 years, however, to see how these changes might actually have impacted DASNY's ability, or not ability, but the quantity of offerings that we've been able to sort of issue? Can you?
On a going forward basis?
Just to track to see if we, I don't know how you do that. I guess you can. I mean, I guess you could, these changes, right? The effect of these changes, obviously, a year might even be too little time period, but a year,
I think we can do that,
just to
Jerry.
see and
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
maybe you need to do more. I don't,
Yeah.
you've known we've always tried our best to accommodate
Yep.
in being as reasonable as
Yeah.
we can under.
Yeah, no, I think we
You
can
know what I
definitely
mean?
do
I
that,
just, I'm
yes.
curious to
Because I think,
see that.
Because I think it goes back to the discussion we were having earlier, that the place where this is making the most difference is in the triple B category for higher ed
right.
and in the healthcare space. So to the extent that we know that, those are the primary areas, to the extent that the business comes in, certainly we can be having those kinds of conversations and, get a little bit more color in terms of people's thoughts.
And it still would be nice if you, and I realize it's a difficult assignment, but to sort of enhance the pool of potential not-for-profits. We've had this discussion over the years about having to go back.
Yep.
But to try to open up the door,
Right.
To keep it open, not every time it goes, because that would increase your possibility, I think, of issuing this to the
And,
not-for-profits. We've had this dialogue
we've
over.
We've had this conversation over time that,
Right.
when we made the changes to the guidelines in 2009 after the financial crisis to allow for the authorization for triple B financings and then to do the private placements, again, it was a move to try to ensure that we had options
Yes.
for all of the borrowers. And when we came back and reviewed periodically, I think, I had shared with the board my thoughts, and I think it was probably similar thoughts that the board held, that I had actually expected to see probably more triple B clients and maybe not as many private placements. It turned out not to be the case. It turned out to be the opposite, which was interesting. But I think probably what that points out, and I think, what Gerard has noted over time, is what that really means is that's the area that we really should focus on, and we should really go out and try to cultivate those relationships with folks in that category.
So we have effectively removed an exception. So yes, the board has, if it came to you, probably look at it and say, okay, well, we want these provisions, this security package.
Right.
But we've effectively now eliminated the
The
exception.
need to make an
That's
exception.
right.
Right.
And so that gives us an opportunity to begin to mine and start talking to those institutions and saying, look, you should be coming to DASNY. And those were institutions who at one point in time executed through DASNY. They may have defeased away 10, 15 years ago. So I think this gives us optionality. It ensures that New York State has a presence, okay, not just in terms of A or better. We're talking about the investment grade category, right? Triple B minus and above.
Right.
In terms of providing the tax exemption, all right, to those institutions that have the opportunity to. And even if we're looking at a spectrum below that, we still have private placements.
Of course.
Okay, and we can look at, if you want to do exceptions in that category, that's a different issue.
I agree.
But I think this provides DASNY with the opportunity to reposition and reclaim its role as the institution that everyone should be looking at in that category. Because we looked at our fees last year. In 2015, we made the changes. I think that
Yep.
opened up opportunities and brought more higher education and a number of healthcare institutions. We'll go back after this and we'll start talking to the healthcare institutions. Hiring, we're building out a client account management organization. So I think all of that will help us document and create data, all right, to advantage how we begin to service clients across, these two spectrums, healthcare and higher education.
So back to the credit summary, the transaction summary. Forgive me. It also gives board members an opportunity to pick up the phone and call if they think if there's information that would impact their whatever their judgment is. And there's some place in the NYU summary where we would have said this organization has a higher international percentage of international students over a period of time. Now it says this institution continues to attract international students. So we don't make any judgment about the curve, what the curve looks like, which is fine. But if I wanted to know the answer to that question, I could pick up the phone and call you between receiving this and coming in to talk about it. Or the one that I'm beginning to think more about with regard to colleges and universities is the tuition discount rate. What are schools that are having a tough time having to do to discount their tuitions through scholarships and grants and whatever else, and how does that affect their net revenue availability? I'm just beginning to give that some thought.
And you raise a good point, Alan. What I should have said in sort of my introductory remarks about the transaction summary is that really the changes, I had said that they were really very modest.
They are.
But what I should have said more descriptively is that the changes that we made were to really take out any language that was very specifically credit-oriented or opinion-based.
Yeah, okay.
So that was really kind of the scope of the changes. And I think, are sort of reflective of that when you look at the black lining.
I got it.
But you would still have the local, the typical political piece in here, the neighborhood, if everybody's,
Absolutely.
if we should be aware that there's a
Neighborhood
objection, not the,
Yep.
but you still will keep that in there, at least give us a little bit of a heads up.
And I guess the last thing I would just mention back on the guidelines is we talked about the guidelines being focused on changes to the investment grade category. You'll see there's some black lining in the private placement language, but that's really just technical, non-substantive cleanup changes. I just wanted to note that for the record.
I don't have any more questions.
For Portia, Charlie, anything for you?
Nope, I have nothing further.
Just going to go look to our council just to confirm that we have the authority to do this and that there's no questions of our authority,
No.
et cetera, and that we certainly have done a very well-researched, very interesting, by the way, I might add, from my own insane personal viewpoint, like the drive into the deep into the weeds, but I found it interesting.
Some of us like them.
Why, I don't know, but the floor somewhere up here.
Because it was
around
well
the
done.
11th.
This was a business decision, and we got Squire, as
Right.
well as our own internal legal team, to document and look at sort of our statute and all of the legal issues. But we have the ability, from a business perspective, to look at this and do this. What was important, I think, in terms of working with them, was to illuminate over a long period of time why DASNY had particular practices.
Yeah, no,
that's
that's what I was talking about. I mean, I felt that was a very
That was very good.
interesting, you sort of go back in time. As they always say, go back to square one, right? Like,
Right.
go back and think it through, and that clearly was of, at least to me, was of,
Document that history.
I've been around long enough that I remember why they amended the MICFA Act to include the guideline requirement in project loans, because mortgage loans was very specific. We wanted the ability to do obligated groups, which may or may not have had, a mortgage involved, but they wanted to make sure that we at least had some criteria. Clearly, we have criteria, so from a legal perspective, that's sort of the analysis.
I don't think Netflix is doing a show on that. I'm still
For the record, I wanted to thank Jeff
Yes.
for, as you just did.
I was going to say,
For
thank you.
a
From,
piece
at
of
least
work.
from the finance board perspective, we're not obviously speaking on behalf of the full board. They will have an opportunity tomorrow to
And I'll do this
further
too.
inquire and.
It was a team effort.
Yeah, of course it was, but what you did was to parse as you demonstrated the ability to do it. The difference between this board's receiving information to make good financial decisions and this board's having no involvement whatsoever in creditworthiness. creditworthiness decisions. And I thought that this piece of work really, the bright line that you did there, that the group did there, that everybody, that the team did there,
Right.
it is very much appreciated. Because it gives, and here's one of the reasons why, it gives the board an opportunity to pick up the phone and call and get financial information without having to worry about whether or not others think that this is about credit. It's not about credit. It's never been about credit. It's not going to be about credit. But that memo sort of lays out the groundwork to say it's the board, and it can request information and not be worried about the 10b-5 matter that you raised very adroitly, by the way, in this memo. So thank you for that,
I would like to.
and thank you for that, Mike.
Team effort, Jeff's right.
Yeah,
Right.
no, I got nothing.
And then I think, to our, even they'll have an opportunity tomorrow, but to our other board members, Al, I mean, they put a lot of thought and discussion into this.
Mhm.
I think it started one way. I think it became I can say a better product, but sort of a well, thought through process.
No, it's better.
But thank you all for working us through this as well, and thank you, Gerard, for starting. Portia, of course, for your always insightful. Anyway, so is there any other questions or concerns, Charlie?
Nope,
I guess
not for me.
we'll, from the finance, again, with the disclaimer that the full board will have every opportunity they would like tomorrow to fully discuss this proposal, right? But we will recommend, or I'll look for a motion to recommend approval at tomorrow's full board meeting. Charlie?
I can move, second.
Second.
Thank you, Charlie. All in favor, aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Charlie, I'll note that was it sounds like that could be your last vote in
Yeah,
favor
actually,
of the resolution
as
at the
long as you brought it
finance.
up, this is probably my last appearance before the finance committee, and
Yes.
I guess I've already had my last appearance at the board meeting, so Tracy will be there tomorrow.
Yes, well, Charlie, I note that, as long, I forget, Al, how long I've been chair of the board, probably the finance chair, whatever, 70.
Since the
70 years,
beginning.
70 years, whatever.
Since it's
That's right,
inaugural
but the
meeting.
original finance.
You were
crew,
the
yes,
original
right,
finance
right,
committee
right.
chair.
You can always say the original, 30 years, 50 years from now. Anyway,
Yeah.
but Charlie's always been a great voice to have on the finance committee. Always insightful,
Well, it's-
always relied on from the Department of Health perspective, Charlie.
Certainly.
I know you're retiring soon, but I think I would like to, and I think Al would certainly join me in thanking you for all of your work and your guidance over these years. I personally look to you on most of these hospital financings, and you always had this wonderful way of giving us what we needed to know in a pretty succinct way, and so I thank you, and I certainly wish you nothing but the best in your future endeavors, and you're always welcome to a finance committee. I know the people are lined up on the door, but we can get you to the front of the line, Charlie, if you ask.
We can get you a special ticket for the.
So
the orchestra.
you will be greatly missed, Charlie. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. You're in good hands with
Please.
Tracy, and certainly has been an honor to serve on the committee and on the board.
Charlie, since I gather you're not going to be at the meeting tomorrow, is that correct? Are you coming tomorrow?
Tracy will be down there tomorrow.
Okay, so you
I won't be there.
You will not. So let me say a couple of things. You have actually probably taught me more about healthcare finance than first, more than anything that I wanted to know. I'm sorry, Charlie. I'm trying to say something nice, and it didn't come out that way. But I've never wanted to know as much about healthcare financing as I do now because of you. While that sounds a little weird, the fact of the matter is that these issues are top of mind for certainly this city and this state and for the nation at large, how we finance healthcare. You're an expert in it. You've worked hard to in your own way make sure that we're thinking in the right direction about how healthcare in this state is treated, where the money comes from, and how much we allocate of state funds, money that could be spent otherwise on the people of the state of New York for other things. Larry, who is sitting 3 chairs away from you, has given us sobering evidence of what can happen when it goes wrong. And I will say to you that what you have done for DASNY, but more importantly, what you've done for health and the quality of health care around this state and hospitals that you've had dealings with, approvals you've had to write, it's just been terrific. It's been, and I know it's a labor of great care. You don't do it because you have a job. You have done it because you know what impact you can have. And I want to say on behalf of the board that, I'm sorry you're not going to be there tomorrow. I may say some of this anyway at the board meeting, but I want to say it to you directly. We are and will be forever grateful for your time and your effort and your energy, even when we knew it was frustrating, on behalf of the Department of Health. Thank you very much, Charlie, for what you've done.
Yes, Charlie, thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your kind words, and I know I've always felt appreciated at the board, and I think a lot of that comes directly from you, Alan. You always seem to find the time to thank not only myself, but I've seen you thank other people for their participation personally, and I think I know I've always found that to be really valuable, personally valuable.
You're kind to say that, Charlie. In your case, certainly it is richly deserved. Richly deserved. The end. I won't say any more.
Thank you, Charlie. And thus, I'll give you the honor of making the motion to adjourn. Finance.
So moved.
Thank you, Charlie.
Second.
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Includes that. I should have asked if I had any other business. I think I covered everything.